Oh, there we go. Welcome to our webinar. Good morning. This is the Ag and Employer Law Changes for 2021 webinar with AIM and the Marin Sbdc. My name is Liana Orlandi, and I'm the Program Grants Manager at AIM. I'm happy to welcome you this morning. I just told you it would be recorded, so we're working on that. We do ask that you mute as you arrive into the meeting. And later on, we will have time for questions throughout. We'll ask you to unmute at that time. First, I'd like to thank the Marin Sbdc and Miriam Carell, who's here at the moment, for your partnership in planning this webinar and creating this webinar. And it's also my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Melissa Sanchez. Melissa, at the end of 2015, after 15 plus years of working in the corporate world, she realized that she wanted to pursue something more and serve a greater purpose. Melissa realized that she wanted to utilize her years of human resources and partnership experience to support independent business owners to make an immediate impact on their businesses and overall communities. Through her strategic planning, communication, and collaboration skills, she empowers her clients to come up with a clear, consistent game plan that will refocus their attention, reignite their energy of success, and shift their perspective when it comes to solving problems to proactively creating solutions. As an HR consultant, she also has strengths and expertise in employee relations, recruiting, onboarding, training, performance and talent management, and strategic business planning. Along with having her BA in communications technology, she has a certification in professional human resources and studied at the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching to get her certified professional coach. So we're really pleased to welcome you here, Melissa, and we know you have a wealth of experience, and we look forward to having the opportunity to ask you about all kinds of different things as we go through the content today. So with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
And before we get started, Melissa, I just want to say one thing about Sbdc for those of you who don't know about it. I'm going to put a link in the chat if you want to become, if you're not already connected and you want to. We are a nonprofit resource that hires experts like Melissa Sanchez and others to work one-on-one privately with you to help you understand and answer your questions. And right now, you know, we're also the local partner for SBA. And so we've been helping everyone with all the pandemic funding, you know, the restaurant grant that's going to be coming out and everything. And so if you need support in any way, we can help you. It's a no-cost service, and the link to sign up is in the chat. And we serve the whole Bay Area from Santa Cruz to the Oregon border. So I run the Marin Sbdc Center, but there's centers in, you know, Sonoma and Humboldt and San Francisco and, you know, everywhere. So just wanted to let you know that we're here as a resource partner for you to grow your business. That's it. You can go now. Thank you, Melissa.
Great, thank you. Yes, and I am very excited. I've been a part of the Small Business Development Center for over a year and a half now. And, you know, with the Marin County, I've been partnering with them since the beginning of this year. So I'm extremely excited about supporting all the small businesses out there, especially food and agriculture businesses, and helping you really navigate the nuances around different changes in the law as the changes continue to change, as well as with the pandemic. There's just been so many different types of updates and things that we want to follow and abide by to ensure that we continue to keep not only our workers and employees in the agriculture and food businesses safe, but also all of you as employers and business owners, keeping you informed and up to date on some of the requirements and things that you need to stay abreast of. So I am so happy to be presenting today, and I want to thank Miriam and Leanna for inviting me to do so. So we'll go ahead and get started. And of course, as all of you know, as agricultural employers, you play an important role in the community, right? You are able to bring jobs, living wages. You understand what the needs are when in the environment and the workplace that you're in. And really, you've made a great investment to really promote the positive image and environment of the people you serve and the communities you work with. So today, what we're really going to be talking about Oh, before I go into my presentation, I do need to give you all this disclaimer. It's a legal disclaimer just stating that obviously this is going to be a wealth of knowledge and information that I'll be sharing with all of you, but doesn't serve as really legal or financial advice. So if there's any specific situations that you need to seek advice from either a CPA or an attorney, I would definitely recommend do so. But at the same time, this will really give you some really basic and general information that you can utilize. Owner. So the 5 objectives for today that we're going to be talking about are going to be the AB5 laws. So basically the differences between whether or not you're going to be hiring a contractor or whether or not you're going to be having them as employees. There's been a lot of confusion in the past years, and there's been a recent change as of January 1st of 2021 with regards to how do we test or how do we determine whether or not we're going to be having somebody work with us as a contractor or a 1099 employee worker, or truly should we be hiring them as a W-2 or an employee where we would now need to put them on payroll and start paying payroll taxes for their work, et cetera. So the AB5 laws is going to be something that we're going to look into today. We're also going to talk about the wage and hour requirements, and this is specific to overtime laws as well as meal and break periods. Overtime, as we know, as far as the federal government is concerned, it's any time worked over 40 hours in a week. But California has really strict specific laws in the state where it's actually hours that will be paid at time and a half over 8 hours in a day. As agricultural and food worker business, they have a slightly different requirement, which I'll be able to share with you in a chart in terms of what the scale will look like as much as overtime and time and a half, as well as double pay may be required per the legislation that's out there for California state agricultural workers. We'll also discuss the COVID-19 safety protocols and the OSHA requirements. There's been some new legislation out this year, especially around reporting of COVID cases and just resources that I would like to point you to with regards to where you can go to really get good understanding around what safety protocols will be required for your business. We'll also go into leave of absences, because there's so many different new laws around what types of leave of absences are paid, what types of leave of absences are unpaid, what is federally governed, what is state governed, what are policies that I can also put into place, especially around paid time off and leave policies that are really just specific to you as the business owner and the employer of your food and food workers. And then, of course, at the end, we'll leave some time for questions, but in between each section, just because it's very hefty in terms of some of the information that's out there, I'll also be fielding questions at that point in time as well. So if there's anything that comes up, please feel free to unmute or put it in the chat with regards to the questions that you may have. Great. So let's get started. So contractor versus employee. And this is a very common concern that many employers and small businesses were really pushing back on, to be quite frankly, especially since this is a new law that came into effect in January 1st of 2021. There have been common laws and common tests in the past that people have looked at where, for example, if you had complete control of someone's work hours, if you had complete control of work and when they needed to work, then of course there were some concerns on whether or not you were hiring them as a contractor or were you going to be hiring them as an employee. Now this year, they've really buttoned it up a little bit more because it used to be vague. And there used to be a common law test and what they call a Borello test, but now they're really being specific. And to be quite frank, it's almost presuming and erring on the side of these that you have for you should be considered employees first versus contractors. Whereas it may have been in the other way around before, where we would hire them as contractors first and then do a test to see if they were employees. It's sort of flipped this year, where we should really be considering anyone that's going to be working with us and helping us with the work that we need done in our place of business should be considered an employee first, unless they meet all of these 3 requirements. And it's called an ABC test. And this would be determining whether or not this was a contractor instead. So the ABC test here you'll see above is A, that the person is free from control and direction from the hiring entity connected to its work performance, or connected to the work hours, or connected to the rate of pay. So by definition of free from control, it means that if the person that's doing the work for you is free from being required to say, you're only going to pay them this, or they are free from also you dictating the hours that they are going to work, or they are also free from maybe taking on other projects and services outside of your business, this is the time where you could say and possibly deem them as being a contractor versus an employee. Number B talks about, or letter B talks about how the work performed is also outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. So again, if this is the type of work that they may be doing at other places of business, or if this is the type of work that isn't something that your particular business specializes in, then yes, this person can also be considered a contractor because they meet the B portion of the ABC test. So A is about control of their work, control of their hours, control of the rate of pay. B is about, does the work pertain to something outside of your usual work that you're having them do? So I'll give an example. So for example, you may hire a social media person for your food business or your farm, or someone that's coming on site to maybe take photographs or help you with, promoting your business from a social media standpoint. That would potentially be a contractor versus an employee because it doesn't follow the usual course of what you're doing in your business. Your business is food, your business is agriculture. So the person you are hiring as a contractor is only someone that's coming in to do specifically social media work, and you don't control their rate of pay. You may not control the hours that they're going to be coming in. You'll have an agreement as to when they will come in, but it won't be a controlled piece where you need to report in from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., etc. And then the C test is that customarily the contractor will be engaged independently in a different trade or business, and may even have outside customers or clients that they serve alongside with your business. So again, the social media person or a photographer or someone that supports you as far as the vendors are concerned for mobilizing some of your product, your truck drivers, etc. So those folks that are coming into work as a separate vendor for you may also do that same type of work for transportation of goods and products for other farm and agricultural type businesses. So if you think of it that way, they are not employees, they are more considered a contractor. So just at the bottom, I talked there about workers are generally presumed to be employees unless proven under all conditions of the ABC test, and therefore then they would be deemed independent contractors. Now, there has been a lot of pushback, especially with gig economy workers, or there's some independent type industries like the photography business or the newspaper business or videography, where they would hire outside contractors to help with an event, for example. Those would be some exceptions to the rule, but ultimately an employee at this point in time, unless they meet this ABC test. Other considerations test is that a contractor will also be paying their own income taxes. So you would be providing them with a 1099 if they've worked with you and provided services to you as a vendor. Again, as I mentioned, full control of their own hours. They set the rate of pay. They won't be using your supplies or equipment. They'd be providing their own equipment, utilizing their own computer systems, maybe their own, supplies. They also will probably invoice you as a contractor. So the rate of pay is determined on the invoice. They usually will invoice you once a project has been completed. And then the most important piece is this last bullet here, where work performed is non-essential or not core to the business services that you provide. Again, a good example of this is, for example, maybe you're thinking about having somebody man your booth at a farmer's market, right? So someone I know who she runs her own honey company. And she's like, well, do I bring the people in that are going to man my booth at the farmer's market as an employee, or are they contractors? And I said, well, let's ask the question. Are they going to be essential to your core business service, that if you did not have them working your booth at the farmer's market, you're not able to earn income or revenue? She says, no, I absolutely need them to be running my booth at the farmer's market. Then they're considered an employee and not a contractor. Contractor could be someone maybe part-time that you hire last minute to fill in for your original employee that was supposed to be there and was scheduled to be there. You could have maybe a one-off, two-off contractor to help support with that, because they're not your regular employee that you're dictating their hours, their rate of pay, and the work that they're going to be doing to run your booth at your farmer's market. So those would be considered W-2 or employees that you would have. Okay, and last, what I put there at the bottom is that contractors can also provide supplemental service. They should not be your primary source of income. So again, similar to your social media person could be a contractor, a lawyer could be your contractor, an accountant or tax preparer or bookkeeper can be your contractor, because it's not the core of your business with regards to running it from a food and agricultural perspective. Okay. So what questions do you have around contractor and employee? All right, if not, then I'll check the chat fairly quickly. Great. So moving on, wage and hour requirements. So this is something that small businesses and employers need to definitely be aware of when it comes to ensuring that they're properly paying their employees, especially the W-2 employees that are on payroll, that they are obviously in a timely manner, giving them their regular paycheck and a regular payroll schedule. So that can be 2 weeks time, that could be every other week, depending on your payroll provider that you have supporting you with processing that payroll services. But also on top of the payroll requirements of ensuring you're giving them a paycheck, it is always a good practice to ensure that you're also providing them with their work schedule in a timely manner. Now, it's not required by law, but at least I know that there's several food, like for example, I have a client of mine that she runs a yogurt shop, and she tends to like to give her employees their work schedule the week prior to their schedule. And sometimes I say to her, well, it's great that you're giving it to them a week before they're actually scheduled to work, but before that, it's actually a best practice to do it 2 weeks prior, at least 2 weeks prior to their scheduled work shifts, because then people can plan ahead. People can plan accordingly. They can take time off, or if they're part-time employers or part-time workers, they can work other positions or other jobs in other locations. If you've got farm workers that are working at multiple locations, giving them an advanced schedule of at least 2 weeks in advance time prior to their actual scheduled work time is extremely key to making it beneficial to them when they are looking at their own schedule and being able to show up when they're supposed to show up. But alongside of that, let's talk about wage and hour requirements of things such as overtime and meal and break periods. So what you're going to see here, this is a chart that there has been legislation out there with regards to agricultural workers, especially around overtime, and especially in the state of California. So as I mentioned in my intro, federal requirement says that you need to pay your employees or your workers overtime pay after 40 hours. California actually requires that we pay overtime after 8 hours worked in a day. This is adjusted for agricultural workers. And so you'll see here, based upon how many employees you have within your business, employees with 26 or more employees as of January 1st, 2019, overtime will actually be paid, which is time and a half of pay, after they've worked 9.5 hours in a day. So there's a little bit more leeway as an employer for agricultural workers. Effective once you've reached, or if you've got 25 employees or less, effective date of January 1st, 2022. So this upcoming January next year, then you also need to pay overtime at time and a half for any hours worked more than 9.5 in a day and 55 per week. And so you'll see the growing scale of on January 1st, 2020, so last year, 26 or more employees, as far as your business is concerned, you have to pay overtime at time and a half at 9 hours in a day. This year, more than 26 employees, you need to pay overtime at time and a half at 8.5 hours in a day. And then January 1st of 2022, then you will be meeting the California state standards for all workers of 8 hours of overtime at time and a half in a day. Okay, so that means if you've got them scheduled 10 hours in a day, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. We'll talk about meal and break periods in a second, but if you've got employees of more than 26 or more, and they're working 10-hour days, then they're paid time and a half at beyond that 9.5 mark. And in January 1st, 2022, they're paid at time and a half beyond the 8-hour mark. So the 2 extra hours or the 0.5 hours, depending on the time frame that you're looking at here in this table, will be at time and a half. Okay. If they are scheduled more than 12 hours in a workday, they are also going to start doing double rate of pay. So instead of time and a half, if they're being paid roughly $13 to $14 an hour, double pay would be then they're getting paid $26 to $28 that hour for those additional time work at 12 hours. Being scheduled at 12 hours or more than 8 hours on the chart that you're looking at, up to 12 hours in a workday. Okay. Now there is of course an additional stipulants and ordinances specific to agricultural workers. Oh, let me go back 1 second. And it says that generally most employees will be paid or entitled to time and a half for their first 8 hours if they are scheduled a 7th consecutive day. Because for agricultural workers, they may be working every single day. The goal is that they should at least have 1 day off, right? So they may only be employed at 7 days if it does not exceed 30 hours in a week. So there are some exceptions. You can have an ag worker helping you out all 7 days a week without getting any overtime, as long as it does not exceed 30 hours in a week. Okay, and then of course, as of right now, if they are scheduled for that 7th consecutive day, the first 8 hours of that 7th consecutive day, they're paid at time and a half. And any additional hours in excess of the 8 hours on that 7th consecutive day, they will be paid at double pay or double rate of pay. So there's a little bit of additional leeway for agricultural workers and how you're scheduling them, but be aware of the additional rates of pay that you'll be required to pay them based upon how you're scheduling them in a work week. Going forward, especially January 1st of 2022, there's going to be a lot more stricter requirements on whether or not you can have someone work a 7th workday, a 7th consecutive workday in a week. And there will be some exceptions per the labor code, and you want to look up what those exceptions are. An exception would be something to the effect that if it's going to potentially harm the property of the land, if you don't have the employees working 7 days a week. And that's still highly unlikely, because the goal should be that you have various employees and multiple employees to cover all the different shifts on your farm. But it is something as of right now that is allowable. So any questions on overtime or any questions on how rate of pay changes based on how many hours you have your food or ag worker working for you? Okay. So now let's talk about meal and break periods. So a meal period is required for a minimum of 30 minutes if you've got your employee or your worker working a shift of 5 hours or more. So they are going to be required to get a 30-minute meal period for a shift of 5 hours or more. Now, let's say you've got them scheduled for a 6-hour shift. You may allow them, if the employee is in agreement, to have them work the 5.5 hours and their last remaining 30 minutes is their meal break and they're off for their shift. That is extremely rare on extremely rare occasions, and it isn't recommended. But if it is something that you do and it is a practice for your food business, then it is allowed to have them work the 5.5 hours and the final 30 minutes of their meal break. Now, if they work more than an 8-hour shift and they're going up towards more, again, the 10-hour shift, the 12-hour shift, then there's a requirement of a 2 30-minute meal period. And their first 30-minute meal period needs to be within the first 5 hours of their shift, whereas their second meal period will be within the last 5 hours of their shift, but before the final hour and a half that they're going to end their shift, especially if it's a 10-hour shift. Okay. A 30-minute meal period is unpaid, especially if they are being given the requirement to completely step away from their workstation or their work location, and they're relieved of all duties. So if they are relieved of all duties, the 30-minute meal period is an unpaid meal period that they can utilize. Now, if they are still required to stay at their workstation, so again, for example, if they're working at a farmer's market or maybe you're short-staffed, they're not able to leave their particular workstation, or if they're in the fields and they are unable to leave their particular section of their field, then yes, it's considered on-duty meal period. They can take the 30 minutes to rest, but if at any minute they're on call and they need to jump on to kind of meet and greet a customer at a farmer's market or to still work the field, they haven't completely been relieved of all duties, they've still got their eye on what's happening around them, then it is an on-duty meal period and therefore must be paid. So it's only if all duties are relieved, it's unpaid. If they are still have one eye in, one eye out, so to speak, on what needs to be happening with the business, then it is a paid meal period of 30 minutes. And then rest periods come up when bathroom breaks, hand washing breaks nowadays, especially with COVID. You want to be able to give your food workers hand washing breaks. Those are within 4-hour increments, and they're given at least 10 minutes of paid rest or break period. There's no deduction of wages. It's just straight 10 minutes. They can step away to go wash their hands. They can step away to use the bathroom, and it's within every 4 hours. So if they've got 4-hour shifts, you give them 2 10-minute, 8-hour shifts are 2 10-minute rest periods. 10 or 12-hour shifts, again, you split it up accordingly within the 4-hour time block. Now, there are on occasion very rare instances of exceptions, and the only rare instance of exception is wherein it will not impact the welfare or the comfort level of the employee, right? So you can bypass the meal or rest period if, let's say, they are the only ones there, but they aren't being impacted from a welfare standpoint, and if it truly does create an undue hardship for the employer. And an undue hardship is something, again, that property might get damaged if they leave their station and let's say they didn't get someone to relieve them of their shift. And that would be pretty much it. Property or food might get lost or wasted, but it's extremely rare for the exception. So it's always important to continue to provide your workers with meal and break periods, especially now during COVID, where there's a lot more requirements too around the hand washing protocols. Great. What questions do we have around meal and break periods for wage and hour requirements around overtime as well as just in general scheduling of your employees. This is one area many of you may have heard of. It's the Office of Labor Standards, OLSE, Office of Labor and Standards. I can't remember what the E stands for. Office of Labor and Standards Equity, I think it is. But basically, this is the one area that business owners and employers will receive a lot of penalties and complaints from workers. I see this also a lot in the restaurant industry, where they are actually being reported, employers and small business owners are being reported for not being given these meal and break periods. So your penalties can add up if you are unable to provide your workers with these break periods. And it is a requirement for it to be a mutual communicated conversation around it. So some employees might argue, well, my boss never told me to go take a break. Well, no, it's responsibility of the manager or the boss of the business plus the worker. So it's a mutual agreement that needs to take place where you're going on your break at this time, you're going on your lunch break at this time, you're taking your 10 minutes at this time. So there's no excuse of they never told me, therefore I shouldn't be that's why I was never paid it, or the employer shouldn't be saying, well, they refused to take their break or their meal when I told them to take it. Well, again, that's also not an excuse or acceptable response, because the employees also should be required to take their breaks as well. So there's been some of those arguments where I was never told, so that's why I never took it, but it's also your responsibility as an employee to know when, but vice versa, where an employer was like, well, I told her to take it or told him to take it, and they decided not to, and that's not an excuse either. It is legally required by the state of California, and everyone could get penalties because of it.
Melissa, there's a question that came through the chat.
I saw that, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so may I get more clarification? So when manning the booth alone, mealtimes, hours worked, exemptions, yes. So this is where ideally you would want to have someone to cover. So if you've got a worker there, ideally as you as the business owner would want to cover your worker for the meal period, or have somebody cover the shift for your worker to go take a meal period. Now, the only exceptions are if, again, like I said earlier, there is a concern that your product, a danger to your product, right? Like, because if your worker leaves on their meal break and there's no one to relieve them of their duties, then yes, that would be considered an exception. However, you wouldn't want that to be a regular pattern of an event, because in the rules of the law, they do say, well, if you are the business owner, you should still allow your worker to take that break or rest period. It's by law required. So at least you yourself should be the one to cover the bases if they need to go off and take a relief of all duties and step away for 30 minutes.
Melissa, can we dig into that a little bit more? Because we run farmers markets, and I'm sure this is really close to home for everybody on this webinar. I think it's very, very common for market participants to have only one employee at their booth because of travel time. We have so many people coming from outside of the area that it's not sustainable for them to bring in more than one employee to run the booth. So maybe you could review. It sounds like that would be the on-duty meal period that a lot of folks need to deal with for their employees. Okay.
Yeah. And again, yes, you can do it and have them be on duty. Yes, but I would agree. You're right. I still would be, I understand that the travel time is a concern, and absolutely that the exceptions would be something that they would want to be looking into and seeing what types of filings they may require if they want to file for some sort of regular exception that they find that it's going to be happening pretty frequently. Thank you, Liana, for bringing that up, and Frederica. Now, what was the question around hours worked, exceptions? It says something about when manning the booth alone, meal times, hours worked, and exceptions. Is there something further on the hours worked that was an additional question? Okay. If anything, we can talk about it again at the end of the presentation. Great. So now moving on to health and safety. So as we know, there have been a lot of concerns right now with regards to COVID, safety protocols with COVID, and especially in the state of California, there's going to be some guidelines and industry expectations that need to be met with regards to the COVID protocols. But this slide I wanted to put up here just to discuss in general how an injury and illness prevention program works, or what we like to call the IIPP. Okay. And this is, I'm going to talk a little bit about pre-COVID, and then we'll talk more specific about COVID. But pre-COVID, all employers are required to have an injury, illness, and prevention program. And this goes into an alignment with your workers' compensation policy that you have if you've got employees who get hurt on the job, right? So an injury and illness prevention program protects you as the employer should there be any workers' comp claims for somebody who gets injured in the workplace. And the things that would be covered in an IIPP are the posters that you put up. So there are those California mandated health and safety posters you need to put up, resources that you're providing to your employees. So typically in your employee handbook, or maybe even when you have them sign an offer letter or a contract agreement that you may be having your employees sign, you're providing them with resources and links around ensuring that they feel they have the resources available to them for health and safety reasons, and who do they need to report any workers' comp claims to. So typically your insurance provider may be able to give you a link that you could include in your employee handbook, or even in your offer letter that you're giving to your employees when you do hire them on board as someone to work for you. And then reporting, that you want to have some general process around how an employee or a worker of yours will report an injury in the workplace. So right to the left, you'll see posters, resources, and reporting is extremely important to just ensure overall health and safety in the workplace. One of the other things I recommend, and if you are able to do this, depending on how many workers you have with you, especially if you're a larger organization of 25 employees or more, you may even want to have a best practice is having a health and safety coordinator or a health and safety committee based upon how large your organization is. And this could be someone that will go around on a regular basis, maybe take a look at how your farm is set up. Are there any hazards that can be found on the farm that need to be taken care of or put out of the way, like tripping hazards or wiring or watering facilities and tools that you might have set up on your farm. So think of it as your own personal inspection individual in your workplace to protect you and to protect your other employees on site to ensure that there's no injuries that could occur. So like we used to call them either environmental health and safety coordinators or EHS coordinators. And again, for larger organizations, you can have committees of people. Maybe it's like 4 or 5 committee members. They go out on a monthly basis. They just check everything. If you've got multiple locations, multiple farmers markets that you're going to, and ensuring that your employees are safe from the perspective of hazards that they may see or health issues that could come up. But now we are now including, of course, the health issues of COVID as well. There are many different resources out there. I added them there in the middle. I know they are abbreviated. So OSHA is the California Occupational Safety and Health Authority. So that is a really great resources to stay on top of keeping your employees' health and safety. They have lots of great videos. They provide resources for business owners and employers to put up posters and links to training. CDPH stands for the California Department of Public Health. And this is definitely a resource right now that should be pretty much in your back pocket because of COVID. And on the CDPH site, and I'll give you the links at the end of the presentation, there are industry-specific guidebooks that you can download and look at on your own. I think I have one up. Give me 1 second here. I might have to stop my share for a minute and share with you the, if you haven't had a chance to see the one for agriculture safety, on the CDPH site. It's very, very helpful and very useful for all of you to have this and incorporate any of the guidance that they are providing you, especially around COVID. Here we go. I will share my screen because it gives it to you specific to your particular industry. Oh, wait, 1 minute. And the last one there, okay, here we go. This is one that we can give you actually very generic on, not generic, but a lot of really great resources on here on the environmental health and safety. So it talks about air, water, ventilation, air pollutants, hazards, health conditions, indoor quality. And so this is the cdphsite.ca.gov so that you can definitely take a look at what options are out there for health and safety. And specifically, some of the additional language speaking posters, if you've got predominantly Spanish speaking or non-English speaking clients, so there's no TCS here that you can put up to help with a lot of the notifications and things you want to put up regarding, especially COVID right now, and just general health and safety within your business. So I would highly recommend having this really in your back pocket for support. And then last but not least, we've got also the CDC, which everyone has been pretty familiar with based on the news outlets out there. This is the Federal Center for Disease Control, and this is very specific to COVID, but any sort of infectious diseases that may come up within your workplace, other infectious diseases that are pretty common within food and agricultural businesses, could be anything related to, the salmonella or the hepatitis, or even things like personal infectious diseases like pink eye or flu season, shingles. There have been so many different types of infectious diseases out there that the CDC, which is the Center of Disease Control, can provide you with extra guidance on how to handle them in the workplace should something like an outbreak arise. Okay, and then as far as your IIPP stands for, the Injury Illness Prevention Program, the goal is you would want to have a written plan in place. So that should be part of your handbook in terms of what you want to be doing should there be any sort of outbreaks or issues that come up with the food, with certain health and safety issues within your business, the training that you want to be providing to your employees. So when the COVID outbreak took place, the training for many small businesses would be as simple as links that you're sending to them and having them confirm back to you that they've watched and viewed these links. So for example, for food businesses, hand washing, there's a hand washing link that the CDC provides, that you could simply add that to your training modules or your onboarding training that you could give to your workers. So for example, if you've got 5 or more employees working for you, there is also a requirement called harassment prevention training, which isn't covered in this webinar today, but you would be required to give them some harassment prevention training, and it's a link that people can watch and view on their own and certify that they've completed that training. Alongside with that, you could now add the additional CDC requirement and California Department of Health requirements for training as additional links. So hand washing link is one of them. Screening for COVID-19 symptoms is another link. And then a third one is around social distancing and mask wearing. And then the third portion of your injury, illness, and prevention program should be providing personal protective equipment, or PPE. And pre-COVID, personal protective equipment for food and ag workers would be your gloves, could be your respiratory protections for when you're in the fields and you're around pesticides that you need to work, your goggles, your face shields. But now it also includes PPE for COVID. So a lot of it is probably very much similar that you would have been required to be utilizing on the farm, but now just more emphasis because of the fact that we've got COVID also around us, and that we want to be ensuring that all of our workers are properly protected with the proper PPE per COVID protocols as well. Any questions on health and safety? And do any of you currently have an IIPP written out in your handbook, or even something separate you've communicated to employees when you've onboarded them? Question around someone showing up on a hot day. OSHA can show up at any time. It is normally only when there is a complaint, but if for extremely hot days, and because ag workers has a requirement around the heat prevention as part of their IIPP, yes, you want to ensure you've got heat prevention protocols in place for them, then yes, they would show up if for some reason it was an extremely hot day. It's very similar to, depending on what county you are in. I'm located in Santa Clara County. So the public health officials and OSHA, so it could either be a public health official for the county, or it could have been an OSHA representative, will show up to various different businesses just to see if you've got COVID protocols set into place per the guidelines or OSHA protocols as well, because of ensuring the health and safety of our employees. So having a IIPP is extremely important, and we'll go into in a second here some of the things that you want to ensure you have as part of it.
Melissa, I have a question about that. For smaller organizations that may not have this yet, do you know if this is a service that the Sbdc offices can help with?
It should be, yes, I believe we should be able to help with providing an IIPP, yeah. And even a COVID screening waiver that many folks should, many businesses should have for their own employees as well, to help them self-assess their symptoms and self-assess their health with regards to COVID. So yes, that is definitely something I've been personally helping with. And I know a lot of also Sbdcs down in LA area, depending on where you are, or the central region, may have been helping with that as well, because I've been on a couple webinars where they've talked about that too. Okay, great. I love to hear that businesses have the IIPP. So specific to COVID safety protocols, and I think I just mentioned about employee training, and that there's really, really great links and resources, especially on the CDC site or the California Public Health site. There's links there for what is COVID, explaining what it is, how it spreads, identifying the symptoms. So those are all 3 areas in terms of when you're thinking about putting together your IIPP or having employee training, is that ensuring that those links are available for your employees to watch, and can be available in Spanish as well, if that's an easier language for them to understand and learn from. Hand washing stations are going to be required as far as COVID protocols are concerned for your location, your space. So if you've got your farm locations, you want to ensure you've got proper and adequate hand washing stations out in the fields, and that they are given breaks on maybe a more frequent basis. As we talked about breaks earlier, 10 minutes for every 4 hours of work. You want to probably consider maybe doing 10 minutes for every hour worked, or 10 minutes for every 2 hour works. So making it a more frequent habit of allowing your employees to take breaks for hand washing, especially with the COVID outbreaks, and also most especially during your heat guidelines and flu season as well. There's been some discussion around cloth-based coverings, masks, and shields. So following, of course, the guidelines that you already follow as a food and agriculture business, but also maybe adding an extra layer here and there to help support some of the COVID protocols. Ventilation is extremely key. There's a huge discussion right now in terms of what we can do to support a lot of our businesses around proper ventilation of their workspace. So if you are, a home-based business, cooking in a commercial kitchen or at your home kitchen, you've got to have proper ventilation and ensuring that you're supporting your workers with regards to clean air. Routinely cleaning and disinfecting common surfaces. So there's also been discussion when we talked about meal periods earlier, and relieving your employee or your worker of all duties. We used to have some locations would have break rooms, right? So ensuring that your common break rooms are being cleaned and disinfected on a regular basis, because if your employees are going there for their meal breaks, you want to protect them from that area as well. Physical distancing, obviously staying 6 feet apart. So if you've got a manufacturing, if part of your food business is about manufacturing or having them stand side by side to each other or work side by side to each other, ensuring maybe one of your training links is how they would properly social distance from one another at 6 feet apart. And if hand washing stations should be adequate, as long as you're providing them with proper breaks for hand washing. But if there are areas of your business that hand washing is not readily available or provided, then of course hand sanitizing would be an alternative measure to take as well. The notification process. So OSHA has also passed this year a requirement that should there be more than 4 employees or more in your workplace that is infected with COVID, they need to be notified. And there is an additional law that if anyone in your workplace is infected, you as an employer or or if you own a farm, you do need to notify in writing that you don't need to mention who has been infected, but you do need to notify all the other employees that someone in the workplace has been infected with COVID. So that is now signed into law and is not a room for negotiation. So if one person has been infected and has confirmed been tested positive with COVID, and it does need to be a PCR test or a FDA approved test, because I know there's many COVID tests now that are coming out on the market. They're even talking about home-based ones. We are talking about the official PCR or FDA approved COVID tested positive that is usually administered by your doctor. At that point, if it's less than 4 employees or just 1 employee, you do need to notify your entire employee base. If it's more than 4, it is considered an outbreak, and now the government entities need to be notified as well. Okay, if at any event there is someone that has been tested positive for the COVID, of course, all the other employees, once they've been notified, they need to do a self-assessment test, or you having some sort of process of them testing themselves at home. Are they experiencing symptoms? This is again where that training comes into play. What do these symptoms look like? Have they had a fever? If they are experiencing any of these symptoms and have been exposed to potentially someone in the workplace that has been tested positive, then the recommendation is to stay home. And what I've been doing with a lot of my businesses as well is that you can also have your employees, and this is not required, but is recommended, sign COVID waivers once they report into the workplace, where they're saying they did do the self-assessment and that they are not exhibiting any symptoms. And maybe they did their own self-temperature check or something like that. And you could have them sign off on, this is my temperature, and that I understand that I'm coming into work at my own risk, so to speak. So it's like a COVID waiver, but they're also stating that they understand the risks of potentially coming in the workplace, knowing that someone in the workplace has been tested positive. And then for workers' comp claims, especially if there is a assumption or presumption that the reason why they got COVID was because they got COVID within the workplace, you want to ensure that you've got workers' compensation claim forms that you are providing immediately to your employees. It is up to them if they want to fill out the workers' comp claim form. You don't need to force it upon them to fill it out or require them to submit it back to you. All you need to do as a requirement by law as an employer is to provide them with the form. Here's a workers' compensation form. Please feel free to fill it out. Now they as an employee should fill it out within 30 days and submit it back to you to file the claim, but there is a statute of limitation of up to a year. They do have up to a year as well for the claim to be considered. And again, be aware of what the requirements are for your public county health department. Every county might have even a stricter rule or regulation for reporting COVID issues that show up in the workplace. When I mentioned 4 or more, I was talking generally speaking as far as OSHA is concerned. But if your particular county has something more strict, you want to also research that to ensure that you're in compliance with what your particular county requirements are for reporting COVID cases. So any questions at all around COVID safety protocols with regards to the workplace? And it looks like I'm at 11:05, Leanna, right, if we're checking on time. And so I might just go through the next couple sections fairly quickly, and then we'll just leave it for questions at the end. So anything else on this section?
I just wanted to note we're still looking at the CDPH webpage.
Oh, sorry.
So yeah, we can catch up with your slides. Thanks.
Thank you for letting me know that. I apologize. Okay. Okay. All right, so I will continue on fairly quickly in the last couple areas, but this is everything that I had just discussed with regards to safety protocols for COVID. Okay, and this is where it can get a little bit tricky when we're talking about leaves of absences. And now, leaves of absences for businesses, there are federal requirements, there are state requirements, there are your own policies within your organization or business that you might want to put into place. And then, of course, there's anything that has been COVID related in the last year and a half as we speak. So for leaves of, I'm going to start with the COVID related leaves of absences. And there's really 2 to take into consideration for where we are here in our location. And so there's the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act, which is the federal program. This is normally for 500 employees or more. And then California Supplemental Sick Leave very much mirrors the Family First Corona Relief Act. And it does fall into a place where if you are an employer of 500 employees or less, okay? So what this means is, and there's going to be 6 different stipulations that I'll go through here in a second. But what this means is that your employees, if for some reason they fall into any one of those 6 stipulations, the first 2 primarily being that they got COVID themselves or have been exposed to COVID and are showing symptoms of COVID. and they are required to quarantine based upon showing symptoms of COVID, then both the FCRA and both the California Supplemental Leave Act or Sick Leave Act are allowing the employee to continue to get paid while they are quarantining at home because of a COVID-related sickness. They will be eligible for up to 2 weeks of their regular hours worked, and it's up to 80 hours. So they're working under the assumption that a worker works 40 hours in a work week. Okay, so their rate of pay will be capped at $511 per day and $5,000 per week. So this again is really under the stipulation that they have been exposed to COVID and are quarantining and awaiting possibly a positive test, or they themselves have confirmed a positive test as well. If you've got part-time employees, it won't be their full 40 hours. You would just average out how many hours do they normally work in a 2-week period over the last 6 months. So are they your average 20-hour employee or 35-hour employee? So you would take the average of what they worked over the last 2 periods. You would also include maybe tips if they're receiving tips on a regular basis, so what the average tips they received, or you would also include scheduled overtime. And scheduled overtime is that instead of the normal maybe 8 hours or 9 hours a day, you are having them work regularly 10 hours a week. So you would include overtime for part-time employees to be included in their pay. And again, if they meet those stipulations of having COVID or awaiting a test or a diagnosis. And then you're going to see here in a second, there is an option for workers to also get paid should they be caring for someone who is sick with COVID, or maybe they had to stay home and become a caregiver for a child that's missing school because they are closed due to COVID. But I know many of the schools now are beginning to reopen, so that is less of an issue these days. But at the time where many of the schools were closed, this was an issue for a lot of workers because they did not have childcare and had to stay home due to their school or childcare facility being closed. So this Family First Coronavirus Act, it was put into place last year. I believe it was April or July of last year, all the way till December of 2020, but it has now recently been re-extended as the new American Relief Act was signed as of recently, where they extended also PPP loans. So they extended this as well. And all of these, if you have to pay because you have your employee out on sick leave due to COVID, there are tax credits that are also available to you. So you definitely want to be getting a certification from your employee that they have a positive test, because you can utilize that for your tax credits, and working with your CPA or tax advisor with regards to how to apply for the tax credits, because you're paying out of pocket this sick leave. You want to be able to take advantage of the tax credits that will also be available to you to pay yourself back for paying out that sick leave. So here are the 6 stipulations. So 1, it's a government ordered quarantine or isolation. Now this is not a shelter in place order. This is more of maybe an individual or an industry by the government has been required to quarantine or close. This is something very common that took place in Nebraska early on last year, when many of those meat packing facilities had to specifically close, or their industry closed in that state. And therefore they were eligible to receive some sick pay because it was due to coronavirus and an outbreak in their facility. This could also be, again, remember you're reporting outbreaks of 4 or more employees in your workplace. So not too long ago, this is just my own personal experience, I remember Taco Bell was telling me 2 of their 6 branches in my area were closed because of an outbreak of COVID spreading in their workplace. So it was a government order or a county ordered requirement that their workplace closed because there was an outbreak potentially in their workplace. So if that's the issue, or if it's number 2, where you're advised by your healthcare provider to self-quarantine, or you've gotten a positive test to self-quarantine, or even number 3, that you are experiencing symptoms because of a potential exposure, and you're still waiting your positive test. Testing these days are much quicker than they were before and much more available to many of us. Whereas before, I know sometimes it would take a longer time to get a medical diagnosis for the COVID, being tested positive for COVID. So 1, 2, and 3 is going to be the rate of pay for up to 2 weeks. Now for 4, 5, and 6, which where you're caring for an individual that has self-quarantine, or you've got to care for a child who has their place of school closed or childcare facility closed, or anyone, any substantially similar condition, then you will be paying your employees at 2/3 of their rate of pay instead of the full rate of pay. And 2/3 of rate of pay is like this previous slide. It's 200 maximum per day at 2,000 per week. So it's very similar to the part-time employee. Okay. Now, California has a very similar plan, which mirrors the FCRA, which is the federal plan, but they've narrowed it down to basically 3 qualifying reasons. So the 3 qualifying reasons for California supplemental paid sick leave is subject to federal, state, or local quarantine orders, does not include shelter in place. This is industry or business specific. Health provider to self-quarantine or self-isolate due to the COVID-related symptoms or positive test of COVID, or employees are prohibited from working by the employer because, again, they are required to stay home since they themselves have COVID. So any of these 3 situations, you are also falling into having to pay them for up to 2 weeks of pay at regular rate of pay for sick leave. Now, they don't get one on top of the other. They do run congruently. And as you know, the FCRA will actually work with employers that have 500 or more employees, whereas California paid sick leave works for the 500 or less. And they even taken it this year a step further to say that you have to have 25 employees or more for this year. So starting January 1st of 2021, they increased the minimum requirement to pay this out at 25 employees or more, whereas last year in 2020, you could have 5 employees and you were still required to pay this out. Now, you as a business owner can still make that decision that even though you have less than 25 employees, you may still want to pay out the supplemental paid sick leave. And that would be a business decision to ensure the health and safety of some of your other workers, and also maybe just to ensure that your worker doesn't force themselves to come back into the workplace when they truly are sick. The tax credits will still be available to you, even if you do decide to do it voluntarily.
And Melissa, for those tax credits, are they available to the smaller employers? The 25, okay.
Yeah, smaller employers, especially if you've paid them out, it is available to you. So work with your CPA and your tax advisor. And now here are some other leave programs. So emergency paid sick leave. So in general, California already allows, without COVID, again, there's always this pre-COVID and COVID timeframe. Without COVID, California was already requiring you as an employer to give, and there's no requirement for minimum number of employees. It's just as long as they're a W-2 employee, you are required to give them at least 24 hours of paid sick leave, or equivalent to 3 days. Now, they do have to accrue those paid sick leave hours, and it's roughly for every 3 hours worked, they get 1 hour of sick time. So to keep it clean and simple, I would recommend, as long as your employee has worked for you for 1 month of service, you all automatically give them their 3 days of accrued hours for sick leave, because then it's just hard for you to continue to track. For every 3 hours work, they get 1 hour of sick leave. It just feels like an administrative nightmare. If you want to do it, you're still within your legal bounds to do it that way. But as just a best practice, giving them 24 hours of paid California sick leave is good after, as long as you've employed them within for 30 days. Now, again, the emergency paid sick leave allows them to have 2 weeks of paid sick leave, or part-time is 2 weeks equivalent. So that is still a paid sick leave for California. They do have to meet the qualifying reasons of 1 through 3 on that prior page to get 100% of pay. And as a reminder, you can require documentation or certification of their test. And that's the reason why they are out on this coronavirus paid sick leave. Now, there is also, to this side of the slide, an expanded Family Medical Leave Act. And the expanded Family Medical Leave Act is in addition to the General Family Medical Leave Act that the federal government imposes even pre-COVID. And what that is that as long as you've got your employee working for you for at least the past year, they are eligible for Family Medical Leave Act, which is unpaid leave due to sickness, illness, or caring for someone who's sick or ill at 12 weeks of unpaid time. But the expanded Medical Leave Act, which is what was put into place for COVID purposes, it is now 10 weeks of paid time. Right? So employees who have been employed for at least 30 days prior to their leave request may be eligible for 10 weeks. And it's partial paid time, especially if they are caring for someone who is sick with coronavirus. So there's 2 laws in play here. One, because of coronavirus, it's considered paid at partial pay for 10 weeks. Or you can have the federal program, which is 12 weeks of unpaid leave. Again, both can be congruent. It's not 12 plus the 10. It all happens all at the same time. So once they've exhausted their expanded Family Medical Leave Act, they may have an additional 2 weeks of unpaid FMLA that they can use from the federal government. Now, the expanded Family Medical Leave Act, just to be aware, if they are specifically using it for caring for a child because of no school and lack of childcare, it can be used intermittently within the year. Now, these programs, especially the emergency paid sick leave and the expanded Family Medical Leave Act, as of right now, they are only up until September 30th of this year. Now, if you happen to have an employee that's in the middle of their leave, let's say their expanded Family Medical Leave, and September 30th comes, it doesn't mean that ends. You will just have them finish out the remaining balance of whatever their leave is, if for some reason that expiration date comes and goes and they're still on this expanded medical leave. The other thing to consider with the expanded Medical Leave Act, and I didn't put this on there, is that it's also important for you to know that their job is protected. So they may return to the job. You want to work with them so that they can potentially return to the job that they had to leave for a period of time. It also bodes well if you've taken out a PPP loan, because once you file for which is the Paycheck Protection Program loan, once you file for your loan forgiveness, they are going to want to show that you've exercised good faith in keeping your employees on board. And if for some reason that you were paying them because they were out on family medical leave, they will know that once that you are in good faith practicing the ability to bring them back officially onto your books as well, to give you a better chance for loan forgiveness and a larger portion of your PPP loan to be forgiven, because you've kept the employees in place, or you've kept a placeholder for them to return to a job, to a position of pay. Okay. And then this is sort of some other paid off requirements. So we talked about Family Medical Leave Act, workers' compensation. If they file a workers' compensation claim, there will be a requirement to pay them, but your insurance for workers' comp should pay them. Jury duty falls into a paid time off. It varies based on the jurisdiction that they're serving jury duty, where they will get paid, and the state typically pays them for the jury duty. Your business specific paid time off, you can provide bereavement leaves, holiday vacation time, additional personal leave, additional sick leave, but that's all specific to you in terms of what you want to put into your handbook and the policies that you want to have in place. There's no legal requirements for these 4 sections here at the bottom. And then for the state, other paid off requirements that are not COVID related is the pregnancy disability leave, the family leave, and the Family Rights Act. Pregnancy disability is, of course, if a woman is pregnant, she gets some time off, will get paid by the state disability requirements. Paid family leave could also be if they're planning to adopt, or it's spousal family leave. So maybe it's not the woman who is pregnant, it's the spouse who happens to want to take some bonding time with the child. And if you are employing both husband and wife, so we've got farm workers that both maybe husband and wife are employed in the business, they both get their own separate paid family leave. And then for California Family Rights Act, this is similar to having a child, taking care of a family member, but this also includes now being able to be in support of maybe our military professionals. So maybe someone in your family has military engagements, or an employee of yours has somebody coming home from the military. So the California or CFRA supports them in giving them time off, paid time off, to go and attend services for military activities that could be going. Maybe they're coming home from deployment or any of those types of leaves. So we want to be in support of our employees who have family members that are participating in those types of programs as well. Okay. And so that brings me to the end of the presentation to talk about, I know it's a lot of information, and I want to thank you all again for participating. If there's something more specific, definitely please do not hesitate to reach out to me or to the Sbdc or to AIM as well. And I leave it up to any additional questions here at the end of this time.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for all of this information. We have about 5 minutes, so if there are questions, pop them in the chat or just unmute. We'd love to hear from you. I also just put a link to a survey in the chat. So if you have a minute now, we would love to have you just click on that and tell us how it went for you. If you learned something, we would appreciate that. I will also email it out with all the resources from this webinar. Okay, there is a question that came in through the chat. The 10 weeks of partial pay is confusing. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
10 weeks of partial pay. So let me go back to that in a second. Is it this one? Employees Expanded Family Medical Leave Act is what they're referring to, is what I'm guessing.
I think so.
Yes, sorry, I just unmuted myself. Yes, it is that one. It's Annabelle.
Okay. Okay, great. Yes, so the Expanded Family Medical Leave Act is that they're eligible for an additional 10 weeks. So remember, if it has something to do with, so the way FCRA, Family First Coronavirus Relief Act, or the California Supplemental Paid Sick Leave Act, the way it works is that those first 2 weeks, depending on which category they fall into, they are eligible for a full rate of pay if it's they themselves that have, for 2 weeks, if they themselves have the virus or are suspected of having the virus and waiting for a diagnosis. So there's those 2 weeks that are already baked into that other piece of legislation that they're eligible for. And this additional 10 weeks is similar to the Family Medical Leave Act, which is a total of 12 weeks. This 10 weeks is making up for the fact that they've already either been paid at full pay or partial pay for the first 2 weeks. But if they need an additional 10 more weeks to potentially, again, care for a child that may be out of school, care for somebody who has coronavirus, they may be eligible for additional 10 weeks of partial pay.
Okay, so it's not for if they are still sick.
This is for when they are caring for a loved one
This is
or
for others. Okay,
exactly.
got
Exactly.
it. Thank you.
And is that paid fully by the employer, or is there some federal money to support that pay?
It is paid by the employer, and then it's tax credits that they can receive after the fact from the federal government. And the rate of pay is right there at the bottom, 2/3 of the employer's regular rate of pay, up to $200 per day and $2,000 total per week. And it can be used intermittently within a calendar year. So if, let's say, it's a week here, you know, again, it's total of 10 weeks, but if it's a week here and a week there, I can't give an example. It's normally lumped all together, but I can't really give an example where they've used it a week here and a week there. I think it's just mainly lumped together based upon school closure. The goal for this was really to support the families and the workers that had to take care of their children due to school closures. But this is slowly becoming less and less of an issue based upon schools beginning to now open up more. It could still apply if they're caring for somebody who has COVID.
Great,
And again,
thank you.
And again, you'd want to ask for medical certification just so you have the documentation for when you file the tax credits. In a normal basis, you wouldn't want to ask for doctor's notes or medical certifications due to HIPAA laws. But because we are in such a unique circumstance with COVID and the tax credits and the implications of what you might have to pay out extra for, that's where you want to ask for the certification, mainly for tax purposes. It's not to decline a leave, if you will.
Okay.
Other questions? I have this link too, or this slide as well. I mentioned earlier some of the resources like the Cal OSHA. DOL stands for Department of Labor. That has general information on leaves. The paid sick leave document. So this is a one-page poster that you can actually put up and share with or put into your break room if you've got one, or electronically email your employees. We talked about AB5 employment status. That's the DLSE. I couldn't remember the E. Division of Labor Standards and Enforcement. That's the group that looks for wage and hour issues. And then there were some specific things for agricultural workers and CDC and coronavirus resources as well. So you can take a picture of this and visit any one of these sites, because this presentation was based off of everything that I found on these sites.
Great. And then we also will have the slides available in PDF that I'll email out to you. So thank you so much, Melissa. We're at time. So I think we'll let you go. We'll let everybody get back to their work days. But I really appreciate your time today and all of this information.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And please reach out if there's any other questions or concerns. I'm available.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll have your
Okay.
contact information also in the email that goes out.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Okay, great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.